Rod Stewart's Young Turks. It's BBC Radio Berkshire, 12:10. So you may remember that over the summer we brought the show live from Membury Airfield to remember the huge contribution that our area had made to the D-Day landings.
They were summoned from the hillside. They were called...
Sarah Walker with you this morning live from Membury Airfield.
We sat on the lawns and watched the planes going over to France, and the sky was absolutely black with planes. You looked like you couldn't put a hand between them.
It would have been an incredible sight. I mean, I've seen photographs of the C-47s lined up on the main runway here with gliders either side, and as you say, the logistics and the personnel involved to turn around that, when the aircraft had returned, suffered battle damage, and get them ready again, and all the gliders lined up and ready to go, and just the sheer logistics involved in that would have been incredible. It would have been an incredible sight to be stood here 75 years ago.
Before they've even set off from England, I think he realised he was going to be involved in something really, really big. And I think all the soldiers felt that they were onto something positive. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was something to be glad to be involved in.
Well, one of the voices you heard there was Membury's own pilot, Charlie Walker. And when we met Charlie, he told us all about his project, reviving a World War II fighter plane that actually flew out of Membury 75 years ago. I've been catching up with Charlie to catch up on his progress and started by asking him to recap that journey so far.
It's all about history and the local area, really. I mean, we live at Membury in Berkshire, which is on the Berkshire-Wiltshire borders, and we've got a family business there. And on the site of that business is an old Troop Carrier Command airfield, Membury or United Air Force Station 466, as it was called back in the day. It's all about history, really. We just want to give something back, and we managed to actually track down a C-47 aircraft that took off missions such as D-Day and Market Garden from Membury, and the idea being is to restore it and return it to operate from that airfield and give something back to the local area, really.
And just remind us of what kind of state that aircraft was in when you did find it.
Yeah, well, it's in a scrapyard, actually, in Arkansas, in America, and, when you say scrapyard, that sounds really bad, and of course it is really bad, and it's a 75-year-old aeroplane, but the aeroplane had flown a couple of years prior to that. But we rescued her out of the scrapyard. She was about to be cut up for parts and scrap metal, and brought her back to the UK, where we're working on her now.
And when it comes to the parts that you need to get her back up in the air, you have sourced them from literally all over the world, haven't you?
Yeah, that's been a fun part of the project, that's for sure. I mean, we found parts on Facebook, on eBay, in Bolivia, in the States. We even ended up buying a wreck of a C-47 in Canada, which we spent 2 weeks out there removing the parts just to try and boost progress on our project.
And it's work that's still ongoing, isn't it? Because originally you were planning on getting this plane back in full working order, getting her back into a position where she could take to the skies again in time for the celebrations last year to mark the anniversary, but you weren't able to do that.
No, that's right. That was that was plan A. We really wanted to get the aircraft restored and flying again for the 75th anniversary of D-Day, which was obviously last June, and I'm sure some of the listeners will see a TV programme, Guy Martin's D-Day landing, which the plane was then going to be the culmination of that documentary as well. But sadly that didn't happen for a number of reasons, really, and then we thought we'd quite like to get it ready in September for the 75th anniversary of Operation Market Garden, and that didn't happen either. But it's still ongoing. It's a huge project. It's difficult to describe the amount of work that we've had to do and the parts hunt that you alluded to make all that happen, really. But it's still progressing. We're nearly there, and we can't wait.
Is it possible to explain in kind of layman's terms how much more work there is to do, how many more parts you need to get her back up and running?
Yeah, I'll do the best I can. It's very, very difficult, really. I mean, if you go right back to the beginning, if you think that they don't make these aeroplanes, it's an 80-year-old aeroplane, essentially, and all of these aeroplanes after the war were pressed into civilian service, and they were modified and changed to carry passengers and cargo. So those wartime parts just don't exist anymore. So what we've done is completely disassembled a huge aircraft that's nearly 100 feet from wingtip to wingtip, and every little bit we get to, we've either got to scour the globe for an original part, or and if we can't find one, we've got to make it. And that's the same for every little piece you come to. So by the time we finish this project, I'd guesstimate we've probably put in somewhere in the region of 40 to 50,000 man hours.
Yeah.
In terms of what's left, I'd say there's probably, I don't know, between 5 and 10,000 man hours left.
Okay.
We've sort of broken the project down into what I'd call bite-sized chunks, really. It's like a giant airfix kit. So we've just finished, for example, getting the engines running. They're ready to go. We finished pretty much all of the structural metal work, and now it's just the systems, the fuel, the oil, the hydraulics, and the detailing, really. So hopefully, by the end of the year, we'll be pretty close.
You're a pilot yourself. How does it feel to fly an aircraft like that?
It's awesome. To be honest, when I'm flying any of those aircraft, it makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up to think that you're flying something that's just got so much history. And it's what I'd call real flying as well. I love sort of commercial flying. That's my day-to-day job. But a lot of that is monitoring computers and button pressing. But this is what I call sort of real hands-on flying and sort of wrestling an old-fashioned aircraft around the sky, really. Very much like a car without power steering, that sort of thing.
More from Charlie to come after Pink and Who Knew on BBC Radio Berkshire. Just gone 16 minutes past midday. BBC Radio Berkshire, love that Pink with Who Knew. It's just gone 20 past 12. I've been catching up with the Membury pilot Charlie Walker, who's in the middle of a hugely ambitious project to revive a World War II plane that flew out of our area on D-Day. He's been explaining why it's been so important to him that Berkshire's role in the D-Day landings isn't forgotten. And I continued my conversation with Charlie, asking what it was like to show the families of the soldiers who originally flew the aircraft what he's been doing.
Very emotional, yeah. We were lucky enough to actually speak to both the pilots that flew the aircraft throughout the war. Sadly, they've both passed now, but as soon as we embarked on the project, we did lots of research going through wartime diaries and logbook entries and all sorts of things. And I had very, very brief conversation with both pilots, and they were aware what we were doing, and they told me stories about how they flew the aircraft on D-Day and the amount of hits they took, which was just amazing. But we've remained in touch with their families ever since, and we speak probably on a monthly basis. And last summer I was lucky enough to host some members of one of the pilots' family at Coventry, where the work's taking place. And it was a truly emotional day for his daughter to stand on board the aircraft and sit in the seat that he sat in. It was unbelievable, and she was. There were a lot of tears shed that day, that's for sure.
And what did those pilots, when you were able to speak to them, what were they able to tell you about the experience of flying Night Fright?
I think the biggest thing that I took away from it, much like when you interview any of these veterans, really, is they just thought they were doing their job. It was just normal to them. They didn't see themselves as heroes or having done anything special. But, they were able to confirm to us, that the aircraft took place in all of those major airborne missions and how many gliders they towed and what paratroopers they dropped. And, we were then able to go back and find photographs and match up some of the battle scars to the stories they've told, which is all part of the history of the aircraft and everything that we're doing this project for, really.
What kind of battle scars have you found on that aircraft? Because there must be many based upon the amount of scrapes it's been in over the years.
Yeah, there's many, and of course it's had many scrapes after the war as well in its civilian life. But one that sort of springs to mind is I've got a photo of the co-pilot, a chap called James Hart, leaning out of the window, pointing to a large cannon hole that had gone through the side of the aircraft on the second D-Day mission. We've located that hole and matched it up, and it's in the exact place of where he's pointing to in the photograph. So we've sort of patched around that and preserved it, and that's pretty cool, really.
It must be a really humbling experience, though, running your hand over something like that and thinking about, what would have happened on that day.
Amazing, really. I mean, the history and the people we've spoken to and the things we've got involved with this project has just snowballed and got better and better, really. I mean, what started out just finding an aircraft that flew from Membury with a little bit of history has just turned into something unbelievable, really. And those are all the reasons that, we're doing this, really, to give something back to history, and make sort of, bring history alive for future generations, really, so these things aren't forgotten. And, we're putting a little museum up at Membury at the airfield for people to come and have a look at what happened, and we're rolling out a programme of educational talks where I'm going around with a colleague of mine talking to local school children and just trying to preserve this history for future generations, really.
Yeah, so the museum is a relatively recent development then, isn't it? So it will ultimately, the museum, house Night Fright?
That's the plan at the moment, yeah. There's still a little bit of the runway left at Membury, and obviously with our business there, we're looking at an expansion plan for the business where we can also include a hangar for the aircraft to operate from the runway, probably during the summer months, and a museum which will be free for members of the public to come in and have a look at some local history. It will be curated by local experts and historians, and hopefully it will be a fitting memorial for local history and Troop Carrier Command and the men and women that served and lost their lives for our freedom.
And in terms of when you see Night Fright being finished, you must be kind of reluctant to put a date on it now, because it's changed so many times, because there's so much work that's going into it, I suppose. But when is the sort of aim to have all of this up and running, to have her back at Membury in her full working order?
Yeah, absolutely. I've kind of given up with deadlines, to be honest, because we've missed every one of them,
Yeah.
so it gets a little bit repetitive. But I'd like to think by the end of this year we'll be pretty close. I mean, most of the major air shows and events clearly take place in the spring and the summer, so it might be next spring by the time we roll her out. But very shortly after that, we hope to have things wrapped up at Membury and the aircraft base there. And yeah, I've certainly visualised that day in my mind quite a few times. So we can't wait.
And I guess every time you see her, just finally, because you keep returning back to her at various stages in the process, it still must take your breath away when you see her standing there.
Yeah, it's amazing, and particularly when you take some people up who haven't seen the aircraft before. I mean, it's a huge aircraft when you stand beside it. I don't think people realise just quite how big it is, and it's amazing. It's living, breathing history.
Charlie Walker from Membury reflecting on the restoration of Night Fright. We'll keep you up to date with how he's getting on with that as and when we get it. Travel You Trust on the way then.